My name is Dr. Rosario, and I'm a biology professor at Westchester University. And if you're a Bio 259 student, you know you have an exam coming up. Guess what's going to be on that exam? Neuromuscular junctions. So, let's figure it out. So the neuromuscular junction is such a small little point, right? It's where the neuron is going to meet with the muscle. We're going to have neuroreceptors. We're going to have acetylcholine basically being released, electric signals being developed on the end of the muscle, somehow getting to the sarcoplasmic reticulum and then releasing calcium for a cross-bridge cycle. You can tell we have a lot to cover. But before I do that, I'm actually on my way to have a meeting with Dr. Chandler. There's our chair of biology over here. So cameras off. I'll see you back in my office. Okay, just got back from my meeting. I had a very, very quick lunch, and now I'm ready to sit down at my desk to guide you through a couple of images of the neuromuscular junction. And so I got a couple of images loaded up on my iPad. I'm going to hold my iPad up to the camera and walk you through how I know it's a neuromuscular junction, aside from the fact that it says neuromuscular junction on it. But we will be going through some features that will help you get oriented as quickly as possible. Okay, so how do I know? If I were to go in and erase this, how would you know you're looking at the neuromuscular junction? There are two things that I look for specifically. First of all, the axon terminal, which is just the end of the neuron, is always going to have a little suction-like cup right here that is going to be really close to this very wavy sarcolemma. So again, this suction cup structure over here, that's the end of the neuron, and we call that the axon terminal. Right? That's the end of the axon, basically. And the sarcolemma is just a fancy word for the surface of the muscle fiber. So here's the surface of the muscle fiber, but in the neuromuscular junction specifically, you tend to get some waviness. So that's the first sign I look for when I see the neuromuscular junction. Okay, what else can you look at? If you pay really close attention, let me bring it right there, you can start to see thick and thin filaments. Actually, you can literally see a sarcomere. Right? So what am I pointing at here? Here you have your thick filament right down the middle. If you look really closely, you have little myosin heads, and in blue, thin filaments. Right? So you have cross bridges that are forming, and these structures right here that look really wavy again, that are sticking out on either side, that's your sarcoplasmic reticulum. That is the thing that is responsible for storing and then releasing calcium for you to do your cross-bridge cycling. So again, two major features I look for, either the neuromuscular junction itself with this suction cup axon terminal and this wavy sarcolemma, or if you can't find that, or if that's not super obvious, start looking for the sarcomere. Start looking for muscle fibers, right? Or the muscle filaments, right? So thick filament, again, in red, thin filament in blue sticking out here, and waviness associated with the sarcomere, this waviness, that's going to be your sarcoplasmic reticulum. Okay, now instead of just like showing you what you should look out for, I do want to do a very quick review of the neuromuscular junction because I do think it's worth our time. And so at the axon terminal, we're going to have an electric signal make its way down. It's going to activate one of these vesicles, these synaptic vesicles, to migrate and release neurotransmitters, chemical signals, in this space that is occurring in between the neuron and the muscle fiber. Okay, so that's a chemical signal that's being released all in this space right here. Now, eventually what that's going to do is it's going to cause the muscle to make an electric signal on the surface. So where the sarcolemma is, you're going to start to get your own electric signal on the muscle. And then that electric signal has to somehow get its way to the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Remember, the sarcoplasmic reticulum is expecting an electric signal to then release calcium. And so that is going on right here. Electric signal developing on the sarcolemma. That sarcolemma is going to travel through this tiny little tube known as the T-tubule, and that T-tubule will deliver the electric signal from the sarcolemma to the sarcoplasmic reticulum. The sarcoplasmic reticulum then being able to release calcium all over the sarcomere. But again, it's very important to get that kind of a perspective in terms of how the sarcomeres and the cross bridges really relate to the neuromuscular junction. All right, let's take a look at another figure. This one is a little bit more cartoony, has a little bit more detail, but same type of information. Here we're going to start off with, again, zoom that in, suction cup-like structure, right? That's an axon terminal. This axon terminal is going to be making a synapse or a connection directly onto the muscle fiber. You know this is a muscle fiber because just from the last video, nuclei, that gives you a sense of scale, okay? So the neuromuscular junction, if we zoom in, right, on this little box where the axon terminal is going to synapse with the muscle fiber, we get this. And this is a much more detailed look at what's going on. Synaptic vesicle, right, having these neurotransmitters. And when an electric signal makes its way to the axon terminal, these neurotransmitters, these chemicals, get released into the space between the neuron and the muscle, right? Right here, this is all just space in the neuromuscular junction between the neuron and the muscle. Again, you know it's the neuromuscular junction too because of this waviness, right? And while we're looking at it, check this out. Proteins, embedded proteins in the sarcolemma. Those are literally called sarcolemma receptors, and those are the things that are responsible for connecting to the chemical and making the electric signal on the sarcolemma. Okay. So as we continue on, right, we know that an electric signal is going to be generated right here at the surface, and that electric signal is going to make its way down the T-tubule, eventually to the structure known as the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Again, it's not shown super wavy in this structure, in this figure, but you can tell that it's a sarcoplasmic reticulum because it is basically connected to the surface via this T-tubule. And what does the sarcoplasmic reticulum do? It is going to release calcium if it gets an electric signal from the neuron. And that calcium is going to participate in the cross bridge, right? I'm not going to go over the cross bridge. I already have a recording about the cross bridge that you can go review if you want to. But calcium is important because it kind of acts like the on and off switch for these muscles. Okay, one more figure. And I want to go over this because out of all of the figures we've gone over, this one looks the most different. And this is actually from a scientific paper, right? Here is a scientific figure showing the same exact things. It's not as pretty, obviously, but it has the same information. And I just kind of want to show you how you can use what we just went over to decode this scientific figure. First of all, what did I mention about the axon terminal? Looks like a suction cup, right? Here's your axon terminal right here at the end, and it forms this little bulb, and you already know that there are going to be vesicles that have tiny little neurotransmitters in there. Usually when we look at the muscle fibers, we see waviness in the sarcolemma, but instead of waviness, this figure just simplifies it, showing this little indentation, right? But this is basically the same thing that we've been looking at, right? We have a neuron that is making a synapse with a muscle, just like that, okay? What other structures have we gone over that you should know? Let's just start small. There's your sarcomere. It's labeled here, but I don't even have to label the entire sarcomere if you know that this is a Z disc and that's a Z disc. We have a thick filament in between. We have thin filaments right there anchored to the Z discs. So basically, if you know what a sarcomere looks like, you can identify this as a basic unit of skeletal muscle. Okay, let's connect these two things. We know what the sarcomere looks like. We know what the neuromuscular junction looks like. What connects the two things? First of all, there is such a thing as the sarcoplasmic reticulum, the thing that stores calcium and releases calcium, right? And those are usually going to surround the sarcomere, and we can kind of see this labeled as SR, sarcoplasmic reticulum, holding calcium, which will be released to allow cross bridges to form. Okay, so we got the sarcoplasmic reticulum. There's a lot more detail in this figure that you can just ignore, right? Like, we don't really care about the individual structures that are in here, but we can kind of understand this is the sarcoplasmic reticulum delivering calcium to our sarcomere. All right, what else do we have? This structure is connecting the sarcolemma to the sarcoplasmic reticulum. This structure is a T-tubule. So again, it looks a little bit more simplified. There's a little bit less detail, but you should still be able to go through a figure that looks like this and kind of understand all of the structures that go in it. Okay, if you found that useful, please let me know. If you have any other suggestions for figures that you want me to go through, I'm happy to consider that and make future videos for you all. And the most important thing that you can do for me, if this was helpful to you, is go to class. See you in lecture.